And another film in the Unknown Pleasures series of Australian films is screening on Tuesday, 4th of October at the Thornbury Picture House. A really remarkable film called Vacant Possession. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to Margot Nash, who is the director, writer of Vacant Possession, and Chris Luscri, who is the co-curator of Unknown Pleasures with Bill Mousoulis. Chris and Margot, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you once again. And thank you for having us, Peter.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So, Chris, can I ask you, as I always do, what made you decide to screen Margot's film, Vacant Possession, as part of the Unknown Pleasures series on Tuesday?
Well, I guess it's on two fronts. One, me and Margot have been friends for a while and have been chatting about the state of the industry and the state of independent filmmaking for quite some time. And this is a film that we wanted to screen several years ago, pre-COVID, because we knew that there was a restoration in the works, and we thought it would be a good context for it. Obviously, we had to delay that, but now we're getting a chance to screen it. But the other part of it is somewhat as a provocation, because one thing we're finding with the kinds of films that we like programming, I tend to focus on somewhat more retrospective titles, and Bill tends to focus on newer titles. Although there's some degree of overlap between those two things, is that it's really important to keep the films that we like in a kind of circulation, because we have a real struggle in our film industry and film culture more broadly to kind of revive or keep current the history of our filmmaking. And so with Vacant Possession, it's not quite in that category. Perhaps it's maybe one of the more well-known films that we have screened. But certainly it's a film that deserves to be refreshed and repositioned for contemporary audiences.
Oh, absolutely. It's having another look at it. It's just such a remarkable film. So, Margot, this film dates back to 1994. And of course, the title has two meanings, of course, a double meaning: the vacant possession of a woman returning to her mother's ramshackle cottage and inheriting that, but also the notion of terra nullius and the idea of Indigenous land and or First Nations land and whites having sort of settled on First Nations land. Was that all part of your thinking, Margot, when you originally wrote and directed the film?
Absolutely. The Mabo decision, of course, I made the film in that lead up to the Mabo decision, which overturned the principle of terra nullius in Australian law, and terra nullius means empty country, empty land, and this was the concept that had been enshrined in law, that whites could come to this country and take possession of it. And of course, we're all watching the Australian Wars, Rachel Perkins' program at the moment on SBS about the wars and what happened when the British came and took possession of the land, and the wars that happened. And I was very interested in that at the time, because it was in the time in the run up to the Mabo decision, and it was also very much part of my thinking and my community, I suppose. At the time I lived in Redfern. I'd been living in Redfern for a long time, and I'd been working at the Filmmakers Co-op and working with Aboriginal filmmakers, and I'd worked on a big documentary called For Love or Money, a history of women's work in Australia, and that really changed my life in so many ways, because I really didn't understand the history of this country, and it was a huge education for me to work on that film. And I've been thinking about, now the film's being screened again, I've been trying to go back to what I was reading, what was my influences. And you talk about people talk about the books that changed them, and I remember reading Henry Reynolds' book, The Other Side of the Frontier, about the wars, and it was told from an Indigenous point of view, and that was a book that absolutely changed me and was had a big effect upon what I wanted to do in a film that I might make, wanted to look at some of those issues. But, you know, of course, I'm not Aboriginal, I'm not Indigenous. So there was all that conflict about point of view that I had to deal with.
And how much support, financial production support, etc., did you have to be able to make this narrative film?
I had a lot. It was an interesting time because there was a British a guy called Peter Sainsbury who'd come out from England, and he was head of film development at the Australian Film Commission, and he was a new broom who was sweeping through, and he was giving money to people who didn't usually get money, people like me, and he gave money to Tracy Moffat. That's how she made The Bedevil. He gave money to Sarah Gibson and Susan Lambert for Landslides. It was, you know, he was. I ended up going and seeing him because I was told to get in there because he was giving money away to radicals like me. And you know, I remember it, and I think I nearly didn't go. I nearly thought, oh, he won't be interested in me. But I went and I showed him my film Shadow Panic. And I can remember him sitting there, and he suddenly leaned forward, and I thought, oh, he's interested. And at the end of that meeting, he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I'm teaching, I've got to work, you know. And he said, oh, take a year off, I'll give you some money and write a low budget feature and come back, you know. And I walked out of there with, for me, it was a huge amount of money, and I didn't expect it. And something like $24,000 or something. And I bought my first computer, and it was one of the hardest years of my life, I've got to say, because, you know, you're sitting there going, I mean, I told him the things that I was interested in, and then he said, I'll give you some money, because I had to create something from nothing really, just a few straggles of ideas. And it took a lot longer than a year to get to the point of production. And the Australian Film Commission did fully finance the film. It wasn't easy, I can tell you. It took quite a long time, but I joined together with John Winter as the producer. The Australian Film Commission put us together, actually, because I was just doing it myself, because, you know, and they gave us $1.6 million, $1.4 million as a fully funded low budget feature. So it was huge. I mean, and you know, I had a proper crew. I'd never had a big crew like that. I'd never, you know, I'd barely even been on a film set like that, much less have it at my disposal. So, you know, I worked closely with John Winter, and I had a fantastic crew. And so the money just came fully funded from the AFC. We called, you know, that development money, we used to call it the scholarship. And but when the money came in to actually make it, it was extraordinary. So yeah, that's how it got funded.
Well, what an interesting story, and well done that you're able to do that. And of course, part of that that funding, of course, went to getting some really good actors like Pamela Rabe and John Stanton, and it was nice to see Tommy Lewis in there as well. Yeah. Tell me about the casting and the decisions that you made in finding the right people for the roles in your film.
Well, I'd thought about Pam Rabe before I'd finished writing the script. I'd seen her playing Alice B. Tonkless to, I think, Mary Mangolis was playing Gertrude Stein. I'd seen her in the theatre on the stage. And I thought, oh, she's marvellous. And So I had this photograph of her on my wall around all my cards, my screenwriting cards, which were on the wall. I interspersed the cards with images from locations and actors I thought might work. And so she was up there for a long time. I still looked at a lot of other people, but I screen tested quite a lot of other women, but I really had my heart set on her, and I didn't change my mind. John Stanton I had remembered from The Dismissal, when he played, Fraser. And he was so incredible, and that voice is amazing. And so he was, I screen tested a lot of men for the father, but he was the one who was, for me, the standout one. And so they were the two main ones. The Indigenous actors were harder to find, because it was 20 years ago or more. It's about 20 years ago. And, now, of course, if I was casting that now, there'd be just such a wealth of Indigenous talent who've been, encouraged and nurtured through various programs and film schools and theatre schools and things. But then it wasn't quite as easy as that. And but when I was writing the script, I knew, I'd worked on For Love or Money. I knew we had to have an Indigenous advisor. I couldn't do it alone. I couldn't do it as a whitey. And I actually found an Indigenous advisor. Her name was Kathy Kamsing. She has sadly since passed away. And I found her, and she was wonderful, and she worked with me as the advisor all through the script process, really. And she was there for the actors on set, and she was there. I ended up casting her mother as Auntie Beryl. That was Rita, who's also since passed away. And of course, we have the protocol on the front of the restored version of the film, which we didn't have back then when we made the film, because the Indigenous protocols hadn't been developed at that point. But when we did the restoration, we of course put the protocols on to talk about people who passed away, died. So I found it very hard to find an older Aboriginal woman, and I thought, what about Rita? Who I'd got to know through hanging out around Kathy's, kitchen table. And I asked her if she'd test. And she said, oh, my mum never brought me up to be a squib. And she tested, and I thought she was terrific. I think she did a great job as Auntie Beryl. And Millie, Olivia, I found her through the casting agent. And so I worked with Faith Martin, who's the casting agent, and she brought me a whole range of people to look at, and I found the boy through her. So working with a casting agent who's good, and who gives you a lot of choices and helped me to, but I still found it terribly hard to make the decisions.
Okay, again, a very interesting story. Now, tell me about the actual shoot, because the location looked quite intriguing, and I'm sure there were some challenges with the actual shooting of the film, as well as creating that storm that happens later in the film. So tell me about the fun of directing the film.
Well, you mentioned the storm. That was probably the biggest fun part of the whole thing, really. Well, first we had to find the location, and I wanted to shoot at Silver Beach, which is I'd originally wanted to shoot at La Perouse, and I'd been down to the La Perouse Land Council and talked to them, and it was complicated to shoot in the Aboriginal community. I did shoot a bit of stuff. There's a scene with the church and the old bag ladies in the church that was shot at La Perouse. So there was some location work at La Perouse, but the film, Kathy, that was through discussions with Kathy, we decided to move it to the other side of the bay where we wouldn't, and it was actually very near the landing site where Captain Cook landed. It seemed much more appropriate, and it was complicated to try and do it in the middle of the community. And so I'd been over and looked at Silver Beach, and I thought, wish we could find a little house around on the right on the water, because it's very different now. You know, there's huge McMansions all on that waterfront, but it wasn't like that then. It was really run down, and I saw a little house that I really wanted, and I'd taken photographs of it that had been on my board too. And because I used to go down to La Perouse all the time, and I used to go down to Botany Bay all the time and take photos and think about it. And when it came to actually securing the location, I had a location manager, and she went down there, and she couldn't get that house that I wanted, but there was one just up the road, and she was really smart, because you know how it's got that veranda, that wonderful open veranda around the little house. Well, this had been closed veranda, and she went and talked to them, and she said, look, you know, we'd like to take that enclosing off and open the veranda out, and we'd like to blow the roof off, and we'll give you a new roof, and we'll put the enclosing back on, and we'll paint the house. And they went, okay. So I think the person who owned it, their son was living there, kids were living there. So it was very exciting for them. And so they agreed to it, and we did. We took the whole cladding off, and the production designer aged the house, and we blew, the roof. We replaced the roof, and that shoot where it was the storm, and it's the storm that blows the roof off. You know, you've got the sort of fire hoses, and you've got the wind machines, and you've got, the special effects people, and you've got the explosives and everything. I was like a kid in a lolly shop. And the people from that whole area, they had all the deck chairs. Everybody was out there with their cans of beer watching, and their picnics, and it was really fun. And so that we think we blew the roof off twice. The first time you could see the hose and see that it was all artifice, and the second time we got it right, and that was incredibly exciting and fun. So that was, and we shot all the exteriors down there, but all the interiors were shot in a studio. So all the interiors were constructed inside a studio to match the exterior. So it was seamless. You walked out one door, walked in one door in the location, and you walked inside in the studio. So because it was a tiny, tiny house.
Uh-huh. And also that's great, and the look of the film is quite incredible actually. But the music by Alastair Jones also adds an extra dimension to the film. Yes.
Well, Alastair's he'd actually been working with Rachel Perkins on a program up here. And I know Alastair from, he's part of my sort of community, really. I live in Bondi, and he'd been working with Ned, I think, Lander and Rachel Perkins on a series. Yes, that's what it was. I think it was the Blood Brothers series, and had done some terrific work on that. So, I worked with Alastair to do the music. I think he did a great job, and he's a journalist actually, and a musician, and he'd toured with Slim Dusty and played keyboards, and I think he did a terrific job.
Yes, exactly. Tell me about the reaction to Vacant Possession when it was first released, the feedback you got, and of course that includes the 4 Australian Film Institute nominations that the film received, because I think the response was very interesting between critics and audiences.
Yes, you know, I didn't win anything, but at the AFI Awards, because I think Angel Baby cleaned up that year. But we got lots of nominations, and a cinema release. So we got a national cinema release. So it was in the cinemas in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Adelaide, in Brisbane, and that was thrilling. I think the film was very well received critically. It didn't smash the box office, I can assure you that, but it was well received critically, and yeah, that was very interesting. And I think people, I don't know, I think I was in a daze at that point when it came out. I was I was so tired, and I'm trying to remember what people said to me. But it's the thing about the film is it has kept going, and this restoration, which is now coming to the screen, you know, next week at the Tuesday night at the Thornbury Picture House. I think it was selected for Melbourne Film Festival to be in their restoration section last year, but of course it couldn't screen because of COVID, and that was wonderful because I'd worked so hard on the restoration. I worked with Ray Argall on the restoration, and to have it selected for MIF was terrific. And thanks so much to Chris Luscri for his championing of me with that and the film. And now, of course, Unknown Pleasures, which I'm really looking forward to.
Absolutely. Hopefully it'll be a really well attended event on Tuesday. With the restoration, what were some of the technical bits that were introduced or was put into the film to make it more pristine, if you like, in terms of the look of the film and the sound?
Well, I think we shot the film originally on Super 16, which is 16 mil, but it's got an extra bit, you know, because film has a section for the soundtrack, and Super 16 was a sort of, you know, when you're on a lower budget, and that budget was a lower budget, it was possible to actually use the whole area of the film and blow that up to 35 millimeter. And that's what we did. So at the time, the film screened in the cinemas on 35 millimeter, and it was shot beautifully, I think, by Dion Beebe, who of course has gone on to Oscar success and is so fantastic. So we had, without getting too technical, there were various original materials, and one of the original materials was an interpositive. So you go from negative to positive, and it was an interpositive of the film, and I had scanned that, a very high resolution, high definition scan, when I made my film The Silences in 2015, because I wanted to use clips from Vacant Possession. And it looked so fantastic in The Silences. But we only did the colour grade on the clips that I used in The Silences. So I had this I had this big scan that had come from the interpositive, and I wanted to finish colour grading it and get a new high definition version of it. And so that's what I did with Ray. I actually had another go at restoring the film earlier, just going from a very good 35mm release print, but it didn't work very well, and I wanted to go back to that more original version. And so I gave Ray the big high definition scan, which had been cleaned by a specialist cleaner, and so it was pretty clean.
Definition or 4K, Margot?
What's that? Was it 4K?
Yeah, was it? Yeah.
Yeah. And so we, it's a big question. I'm trying to remember whether it was 2K or 4K. It might have been 2K, sorry. So I took Ray the scan, and he worked doing the color grading of the rest of the film. But the problems that we came up with in that process of restoration were that there were 35mm elements that were not on the interpositive, because back then, now we do digital special effects at the drop of a hat, but back then, if you wanted to do any special effects, they were done optically in the laboratory. So anything like a long cross dissolve, which there was a number of those in the film, or they were all on separate 35mm rolls, and the opening credits and the closing credit were all on separate 35mm rolls. So we had to get those original materials out of the archive, and we had to scan them, and then Ray had to match them in. And so it was fairly complicated, and we had to get the original sound mix. And the sound is terrific in Vacant Possession. It was done by Audiolock. They did a great job. So we had to get the most original that we could get for Ray to work with. And all those materials, of course, are in the National Film and Sound Archive. So we had to gather all those materials, and then I had to, I gave Ray a guide image to work with, and then he and I went through it, and I experienced the marvels of digital restoration and the incredible things that can be done. And we did it pretty low budget, because when the National Film and Sound Archive restore films, they make a decision to, there's an NFSA restores, and not many films get done like that. And they do what's called dust busting, which means they don't clean the original materials. They clean it frame by frame. It's digitally cleaned frame by frame. It's really painstaking. But now there are, Ray did a huge amount of cleaning on it, but also there are now programs that you can put the film through, and you could see some sort of sparkle or dust, and he'd put it through a program, and 90% of it would disappear, and then he would hand clean the rest. So it's such an interesting sort of process. And I've now done a number of films with Ray, and he's really he's a filmmaker. He's a cinematographer and a filmmaker, and a treasured part of our film community. And he did a wonderful job.
He certainly has, and as you mentioned, Dion Beebe, who has gone on to great success. The lensing of the film originally, of course, was such an important part of the look and feel of the film. And was it shot with single camera, or did you use multiple cameras?
Single camera, and fixed lenses. No zoom lens, all fixed lenses. Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. And so you'll be coming to Melbourne for the screening at the Thornbury Picture House on Tuesday, and having a discussion about the film. Margot.
Yes, with Chris.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. and
indeed.
Go on, Chris.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a really wonderful event, I think. I like to talk a lot with the filmmakers when we invite them, and I think Margot certainly is a great raconteur and has a great eye for detail about the film, even though it was, you know, quite a long time ago. I find it really, really fascinating listening to her again talk about the process, the methodology behind the making of the film.
Exactly. Well, that should be a great event on Tuesday night at the Thornbury Picture House. You just go to thornburypicturehouse.com.au to book tickets. Chris, just quickly, what's the next events coming up for Unknown Pleasures?
We are about to announce a new wave program of 3 screenings in, I think, late October, early November. And this will be focused on screening 3 newer films that are perhaps undiscovered gems in the contemporary Australian independent film landscape. Not quite ready to announce the titles yet, but all 3 are very, very special films, and we're very excited to be screening them. And again, they'll be screened in the context of special Q&As with the filmmakers and other collaborators on those projects.
Excellent stuff. Always a great series. Margot, congratulations on Vacant Possession and the restoration, and I wish you well. Hopefully you're even considering making another film.
Oh, thank you so much, Peter. And I'm always making another film, or trying to.
Excellent stuff. We've been speaking to Margot Nash, the writer-director of Vacant Possession, screening on Tuesday night in Melbourne, and Chris Luscri, the co-curator of Unknown Pleasures, with Bill Mousoulis for the Unknown Pleasures season of Australian films. Thank you so much, Chris and Margot, for talking with me.
My pleasure.
It's up. Thank you, Peter.
Thank
All
you.
the best. Bye-bye.